Okay, let's get going and welcome to the UCLA Longevity Center webinar. I'm Linda Erkely. I'm the interim director of the center, and we have a great and I feel very exciting talk for you today about starting an exercise routine, tips from a physical therapist. Now, for those who follow us at the Longevity Center, you may know that we emphasize living better longer, and we actually have a program called the Brain Boot Camp Pillars of Health, where we talk about different factors of a healthy lifestyle that are important for actually expanding our healthy living years, if not our lifespan. And one of these important factors or pillars is exercise and the benefits of exercise for people's heart, for their brains, for their cognition, muscles, etc. And a lot of folks know this, and some actually don't really appreciate it either, but some do. But yet they still struggle with how do you start an exercise routine that's going to be safe and effective, and how to do it even if you're older, over 55, right? So this is what we're focusing on today. And we have with us our expert physical therapist, Dr. Claire Hsing, and she's a Boulder, Colorado-based physical therapist who earned her doctorate of physical therapy from Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, and completed her residency in sports physical therapy with Howard Head Sports Medicine in Vail. She enjoys outdoor activities like running, climbing, and skiing, and is passionate about facilitating her community's ability to engage with their bodies and the environment. Dr. Hsing works as a clinical programming manager, helping older adults stay active, prevent falls, and manage pain. So without a further delay, welcome Dr. Hsing, and thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Dr. Erkely, and hi, everyone. Glad to be here. So as she said, my name is Dr. Claire Hsing. I am a licensed physical therapist, and today what I'd like to spend our time on is discussing the process of starting a new exercise routine. And I think even more critically than just starting is maintaining that routine or building the routine in a way that's going to be sustainable sort of from the outset. So let's take a high level look. As an orthopedic physical therapist, I help my patients manage a variety of conditions through really different circumstances, whether it's seniors recovering from a fall or an activity-based injury, or people just experiencing that weird back pain that kind of came up out of nowhere one day. And it all seems different, but there are a few kind of recurring patterns that I really see as barriers, and I find myself consistently educating folks on some general broad topics, and that's kind of where I wanted to form the basis of today's discussion. So it's really about starting an exercise routine, but then also how to keep it going. So some common questions, these probably look really familiar, are quite simple, and most primary care providers are going to have a sort of rote series of responses for these kinds of questions. So you'll get some generalized answers here, and what I notice is that it's easy to give these like neat predefined answers. We're going to get into it in a moment. But what happens next is as you get into exercise, you move into another level of more complex questions like, what do I do if, my circumstances change, or should I keep doing these things forever, or should these exercises change, or these things feel harder or easier? What should I do in response to having a different experience with my body's capacity and that being like an evolving, moving target? So we're going to first discuss some of the habit formation principles that are most relevant to the first initial questions, and then we're going to move into some general exercise science principles that should help you address some of those more complex next step questions. So common recommendations that folks get. These might look familiar to you. They really reflect some general CDC guidelines for physical activity. And they're often cited by your physician or anyone else you might chat with about exercise as a part of lifestyle medicine or as a part of a healthy routine. And it's great to have these guidelines available, but I think it's also important to really understand and appreciate them for what they are, which is a general long-term goal for a really broad group of people with a diverse set of needs and abilities. Um, it's it's great to have this like generalized but also kind of vague destination when you're talking about a large group of people, but you all are each one individual person. So as a result, I think it's really important to take this for what it is as this long-term goal, but then take a few steps back and take stock of where you are today and sort of map out that journey, kind of the way you would like map out how you get from point A to point B in your car to somewhere you want to get to. So the really critical thing here, especially for those who are starting out with not a lot of activity in their background, is to build that foundation. I'm kind of taking all those recommendations and putting them on the side for a moment, and just starting with some of the basic elements that are going to help you form the routine itself. I really suggest something like a 3 to 4 day a week cadence. And the reason for that, that seems a little high for some folks who aren't coming from any exercise background in particular. But what I really like about that high frequency is that it means there's not long breaks where you're going without any exercise. And sort of to pair with that, I think the time commitment for any given bout of exercise can be super short. I said 5 to 10 minutes here, but I think it could be just committing to getting started. And that could be again, as simple as kind of putting on your sneakers or walking out the door, because you always have the option to extend that. But really building that routine is starting to um, not just exercise your physical body, but exercise your brain and your sort of mental relationship with the routine to build that foundation. The next thing that's really critical here is to pace yourself. And so you always hear this term like moderate intensity thrown around, but I find often that folks have really variable interpretations of what moderate intensity means. And so there's two really great methods that I like to recommend to folks. The first one is called the talk test. And this just means that if you were to be on a walk with a friend or family member that you might be chatting with, that you can feel you're able to hold a conversation, but it should be a little bit effortful. It shouldn't feel like the same fluidity as if you were sitting together over a cup of coffee. Maybe you need to take breaks between sentences, or you pause a little more often when you're speaking. You should at least be able to get certainly a few words out at a time. And that would be a good way to sort of approximate what a moderate aerobic effort would be. Another tool that I really love because it's so simple is called RPE, or rating of perceived exertion. And so this is really just based off of your sense of, on a 1 to 10 scale, how hard you're working. I know that a lot of people, when I first introduced this, think like, well, my 5 is not the same as, my best friend's 5. And that's true, but it's not as relevant to the question of you being able to have a consistent metric for yourself. So your 5 today should be meaningful to your 5 tomorrow. And that's the important kind of consistency to keep in mind when using this metric. And this is great because it can apply to something like a walk, but it could also apply to something like an exercise class at the gym, or even a task like doing laundry, or gardening at home. So we often find ourselves when we're talking about new routines with this concept of motivation. People say they're really motivated to make a change, and that is certainly important, particularly in the beginning stages of deciding to make a change. But motivation can be also short-lived, and sometimes it's hard for us to just drum it up, right, on cue. So we have a lot of evidence that supports that, habit formation is really long-term change is really more about good habit building and habit formation. And that feels sometimes like a little bit of a less exciting path, but it can be really fruitful in terms of long-term changes. So the cycle of a habit really starts with a trigger or a cue. It's sort of like lighting a match. It really requires something concrete to happen to change. I guess I could go on that walk now into like, I'm going to go on that walk right now. This cue could be something like a notification on your phone or an alarm or a reminder or phone call from a family member that triggers that action. Um, and then that by itself initiates that routine of, getting into motion and getting set there. The next thing that's really critical to kind of follow this up is some kind of concrete reward. And so sometimes that can be as simple as like the feeling of accomplishment after you do something, especially something that was hard or that you weren't even sure you could do. But for some people, it feels something more sort of tangible, like writing down in a journal or logging that you did something in your calendar. And this can be really important. It might seem a little silly if you're not used to doing it, but it can be really beneficial because it really consolidates this whole cycle of having, completed the circle and sort of reinforce the importance of what you've done. Some other habit formation strategies that I've already spoken to, start small. I think this is where like anchoring to some of those CDC recommendations can feel really intimidating and may not be as helpful as we want it to be. 150 minutes a week is a big, big number, and it's quite daunting as a goal. So start small, just start with something. And then commit to just starting. Again, like setting out your clothes to exercise. That's a great way to just commit to making it easier to get started. You'd be surprised how many times you'll put on your shoes or put on your outfit to exercise. And then if you really don't want to do it, you could, but you'd be surprised how many times you just kind of get going and do a little bit of it. The last habit I'm going to speak to here is it's called stacking, but I would like to call it piggybacking because I think that's, well, it's kind of like a more funny visualization, and I think it makes a lot of sense to me. I grew up with a lot of siblings. So, what I like to do is think about all the things you do in your regular daily life that maybe you don't give a lot of thought to. So, that could be like brushing your teeth or tending to like your plants, making a tea or coffee. Like we do a lot of things every day without thinking too much about doing them, or intentionally saying, "Oh, it's part of my routine to do these things." So what you can do is sort of piggyback off of these existing habits and attach exercise or physical activity of some sort to these habits. And like an example would be if you've always got like a morning tea that you have, and maybe you're used to sitting and reading the paper, maybe like attaching a short walk after your tea to that existing habit. And that's a really great way to just reduce the mental load of inserting a whole brand new thing just somewhere willy-nilly into your day-to-day schedule. All right, so I think we always hear people say that exercise is good for us, but we may not really dive into the why or the how of what's actually happening when we engage in physical activity and exercise. Now, exercise does make us stronger and more resilient to the physical demands of daily life. And when we increase our capacity for movement, we're really benefiting from that positive adaptation. But what's really happening here, I think, is a fair question that we don't spend a lot of time on. This chart is a little crazy looking. Let's just focus on this one part here, right? So if we follow this kind of red line, we can see that first we have this like downturn of stress. That would be like physical activity, creating a little bit of physical stress on us. And then after that, we have this kind of up turn of the red line, and that's our recovery. That's like that good nap you have or the good night of sleep you have after exercise. After that, we have this continual upswing, which is reflected in an adaptation. That's like when you get better at something. And, this doesn't need to be limited to physical activity. It could also be like mental practice, doing a puzzle and getting better at a specific type of puzzle, or other new tasks that you learn. So there is this kind of like cyclical type of a way that we think about stress, recovery, and adaptation as well. So it's nice to think of it both ways as this curve, but also this kind of reinforcing cycle. And so, big picture, as we go over time and we have multiple versions of this stress, recovery, adaptation cycle, you kind of see that in general we trend upwards. So your overall ability should go upwards over time, and that's for some people that that may confuse more than help, but I know that for some people this really helps understand like what's the point of exercise and kind of like stressing our bodies if it's supposed to make us stronger in the long term. Okay, so the what of exercise, right, can be really confusing because, if you go to the local gym, they've got classes that are called like cardio, dance, tai chi, everything. It's really confusing, I think, even for myself, sometimes to understand what they mean. But at the end of the day, I think the simplest breakdown to understand physical exercise, and one that I really encourage folks to lean into is a focus on like what system or what part of your body is really being challenged. So this isn't a full breakdown, but it's a really good simple place to start, which is your heart and your lungs or your skeletal muscle or the muscles you can feel on your arms and legs. So we're talking about aerobic exercise. This is demanding of your heart and lungs. You may feel like you're breathing harder or your heart rate is elevated when you're doing this type of exercise. Um, Remember, it's about that system or the body part that we're working the hardest, and that you're intentionally kind of challenging. So those heart and lungs. And now, conversely, with resistance-based exercise, we might also think of this as like strength exercise sometimes. Um, we are really challenging our skeletal muscles so that we traditionally think of that as, the muscles on your arms and legs and your torso. You can kind of feel them contract, especially as you're doing something effortful. And again, most exercises, they will use both of these systems. In other words, you may feel out of breath when you're walking up a hill, and I'm sure your legs are working really hard to do that as well. But it's more about which one of these feels like the bottleneck or what you feel like is being most targeted by the activity. So what are we supposed to be doing here? Once you understand, I think, some of these concepts of challenging your heart and lungs or your skeletal muscle, I think the next question really leans on what you most enjoy doing. Sometimes I think folks want a more prescriptive response than that. But for the purposes of general fitness, the most critical element is really consistency over time. So I think it seems a little indulgent almost, but it really is important to ask yourself and spend some time reflecting on what you enjoy and what you feel like you can continually execute, like time and time again, week after week. There are just so many ways to get your heart rate up and to demand effort from your muscles. That being really open-minded about what exercise can mean to you and what physical activity can mean to you is really to your benefit, especially if you're not the sort of person who immediately gravitates towards one type of physical activity. Another thing I'd like to point out is that it's really often that we discount the effect of being social and leveraging our relationships when we select exercise. It may not be your most intuitive choice, but if you know other folks who are getting involved in the exercise, I think it's great to be open-minded and just try it, because having a support system and relationships with people that you exercise with can be really critical towards maintaining that long-term habit formation. So if we go back to that concept of stress recovery, this is where I think people often kind of drop the ball because they're really focused on the exercise itself and they sort of lose sight of the recovery portion. So active recovery includes paying attention to your diet and hydration, sleep and rest, and then also light movements to cool down and prepare for movement, sort of before and after your exercise. Without that good active recovery, our bodies aren't able to consolidate, that adaptation that we were talking about. So you don't really ever complete that cycle. Now, elements of active recovery don't require fancy equipment or specialists. So they're all things you can do on your own. You don't need to like go get a massage from someone, but it's really about taking some time to focus on yourself and what you need after exercise. Overuse injuries are ones that occur without an obvious event, like a fall or an accident. And sometimes we like to call this a load management problem. It means that the issue comes from a buildup of stress, again, without that adequate recovery. And this type of injury really ends up comprising a significant portion of the root issue for why patients end up working with physical therapists in an outpatient orthopedic setting. So they can manifest as like muscle strains or tendinopathies. Maybe you've heard some of these words before when you've spoken to your providers, but they can also affect the way we experience chronic pain or joint pain. And they often really occur when you're not, again, balancing that stress and recovery cycle. So it's kind of like if we bring that back up, you sort of like don't complete this portion of the cycle, and then you kind of like eliminate your ability to capture that adaptation, and instead we end up with an injury. So I'm going to run through a couple quick examples of some individuals working through challenges in their exercise routines, and then show how it kind of reflects some of the things that we've chatted about. In this first one, we've got Amy. Amy's goal is to lose weight by exercising as much as possible. She's been told she's got some cardiovascular disease in her family history, and she's got hypertension. She heard that exercise was a great way to address that. And the way that she decides to tackle that is by selecting the most advanced, like challenging class at the community center. Amy's really living on this like big motivation from her last doctor's visit. And she takes her whole schedule and kind of clears it to go to the gym and spend time there. And even though she feels really tired and hungry afterwards, but she still wants to get her steps in. She still wants to maintain a strict low-calorie diet because she's really focused on the weight loss. Um, and what happens with all of this is that after the first week, she wakes up really tired and her hip and both her knees are really sore and achy. She has trouble getting out of the bed just to, go use the restroom. And she thinks maybe exercise is not for her. So in this case, I don't think this is quite what happens to a lot of folks, but there are elements of this that ring so true to me. It really sounds like a lot of patients I see. There's a lot of things that are opportunities for Amy to focus on next time around, and that's it should be like pretty clear for those who remember some other parts of the presentation we've discussed to this point, like active recovery, really paying attention to what your body needs after exercise, moderating exercise intensity to be done at a sustainable pace, and piggybacking new habits based on an existing routine. You can't clear your schedule every week for the rest of your life. So already I think she was kind of setting herself up for something that was not sustainable. Our next case is Ben, and he's a little bit different. He's really focused on getting healthy and being able specifically to help his daughter and son-in-law out by driving their grandson around. So the thing that's hard is getting his grandson in and out of the car seat because that's kind of a big lift. The thing is, he hurt his shoulder like a few years ago, and he's really worried about re-injuring it. So he kind of stays away from shoulder exercises. And he's also scared of doing the wrong exercises or using bad form. So he kind of always does the same few things that he feels really safe about, and he doesn't really explore much. In general, he's not really someone who tends to be really social in the gym setting, so he doesn't really ask for help when he's there. And what happens here is nothing really bad. He builds a routine and he accomplishes that part of the goal, but he still notices that it's hard to lift his grandson up and into the car seat. And the thing is, the grandson is also a moving target, as some of you may know, because those kids keep growing and getting heavier. So he's really feeling frustrated at his lack of progress. And this is such a great example of the type of folks that I see in my practice and the problems they run into. Great intentions, a lot of the foundational building blocks towards building a good habit and a good routine, but not having the knowledge to be able to take it forward to really produce that positive adaptation and change. So for Ben, I think the biggest opportunities are being open-minded to variety. If you've been clear to exercise independently, sometimes fearfulness of movement can block you from doing and accessing healthy exercise for yourself. Again, everyone's really different. So, what's appropriate for you is something to maybe chat to your physical therapist or a trainer about. But I think I would first take the assumption that if you're healthy and well, that you should assume most exercise is okay for you until you have to question it, rather than the other way around and assume everything is dangerous until it can be proven to be safe. And then really just like that concept of like not letting the perfect exercise or the perfect form be the enemy of like good and sufficient. And trusting yourself, using metrics like the talk test and RPE to build confidence that you are doing things at the right intensity and pushing yourself to the right level of challenge. So a few big takeaways here. If you don't remember anything, which I wouldn't blame you for, it's a long presentation, but I think the big takeaways I really hope that folks have are to breathe a little hard, get a little sore, get a little aerobic exercise, get a little resistance-based exercise. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Just start. Find your trigger, build your habit, and complete that stress recovery adaptation cycle. And this sounds like maybe something you've heard from any number of providers, but I feel very strongly that this is the case, that exercise is like a really, really cool long-term experiment where you will continue to learn about your body and you can discover such an amazing relationship with your body and its capacity for change and for movement. So I really hope for that, for that relationship for all of you with your own bodies.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. That's great. I have a few comments. And first, I want to invite people to chat in any questions into the Q&A little box in Zoom, and we'll do our best to answer them. So one of the things I thought of in one of your cases, the first woman was the New Year's resolution
Mm,
exerciser. You
yes.
know how, and I used to belong to a gym. This is pre-COVID, right? And it would always be crowded like the first week in January, like, give them 2 more weeks and this place will clear out, which
Yeah.
was usually the pattern. And can you speak a little bit about what happens? I call it like the New Year's resolution exercisers, but what happens that they can't keep going?
Yeah, I think that's a really good example of how people are just kind of like riding this train of motivation. They feel like they want to set a resolution and they want to stick with it, and they don't go the next step to planning how they're going to execute it. Because in the very beginning, in a single instance, motivation can be enough. Motivation can be enough to get you to the gym one time. But
Mhm.
motivation by itself is probably not going to be a good strategy to get you to the gym 3 days a week, 50 weeks of a year, or something like that. Because you can't just, pick it up and turn it on like a switch. Motivation happens because of other environmental or contextual factors, like the fact that it's turning the first of a new year, right?
Mhm.
So come January 14th, what are you going to do if it's not January 1st anymore? And that's where I think it's really critical to work on building the habit and building the structure around the habit. So signing up for a gym membership is actually a little bit of that, like committing to
Right.
that payment or something like that. But that's where, if you think about other things that you do, like maybe you already have lunch once a week with some friends. If you can take that weekly lunch that you already have in the calendar that you always do and say, um, what if we, go to the rec center after lunch and check out some of the classes there and have that be our new routine with this group of friends? That's structure that doesn't require you to have motivation. It's just kind of built into what you're already doing. So it's an example of where motivation alone will often fail to build a long-term change.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Kind of fizzles after a while, or it doesn't fizzle, but like you say, it's not planned out enough to be sustainable.
Hmm.
Um, one comment on the gym, and we have some comments in the Q&A, so I'm going to get to those ASAP. Is I went to a gym for many years, like I say, until COVID, and then of course, like you couldn't go. But a lot of people are afraid to go to a gym. They said, "Well, I'm not fit enough to go to a gym. I'm too overweight to go to a gym.
Yeah.
People are gonna laugh or make comments about me, or I can't go for whatever reason." And I can tell you, like, I have never seen anything pejorative uh, ever in the gym. That it's such a great culture to be a part of because everybody is so supportive of each other,
Yeah.
and everybody understands that anybody who's there, you're doing it right. That's a plus, whether, like you say, it's for 10 minutes or some people are there for 3 hours.
Yeah.
And you develop a whole different social circle at a gym. I felt like I had a secret life when I was part of a gym, but like it's a separate thing for people. So, I'm just thinking as a psychologist, like, don't let that deter you because most people are so welcoming in the gym.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's no matter where you're starting from, everyone is everyone is going to the gym to push themselves out of their comfort zone. If you were like a bodybuilder, your comfort zone probably looks different than someone who doesn't exercise at all. But that aside, the point of being there is to challenge yourself and to push yourself to explore what you can do. So that's a really important common ground that everyone at the gym has. And I mean, I can't guarantee anyone will never have a bad experience. But I think that if those things happen, it really, most of the people or 99% of the people can recognize it's much more a reflection of the bad actor than anyone
Yeah.
else. It's not something I've personally encountered a lot. And I have been, the person at the gym through a variety of phases of my life where I've been more and less fit. So I totally agree that it's usually scarier than it actually will be in real life.
So here we have several questions. Here's the first one is what type of fitness trackers do you recommend? What specific items should you track? For example, pulse, miles, walked,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the wearables out there, they actually cover quite a lot of these metrics. I think step count is a great one. So that could be, there's a lot of different wearable devices, usually wrist-based, but there's also pedometers that you can just put on your shoe if you, for whatever reason, don't like to have things on your wrist or on your hands. I think steps is a really great way to sort of accrue your movement because it's so incremental that it really gives you credit for every bit, If you did something like calculate your kilometers or miles walked, there's such big units. Sometimes it's hard to see a lot of change. And steps is a really nice way to just kind of have a pretty fine-grained pulse on what you're doing. That being said, I think like heart rate monitors can also be really nice to use. The one thing I will say is that depending on where the sensor is, it's more and less reliable. So I wouldn't, take a look at your wristwatch and see, a heart rate that's very high or very low and necessarily take that for being what it is. There's a lot of elements that go into producing error there. But what a lot of these more commercial heart rate monitors can be great for is trends over time. So it's usually not the case that you'll have big errors on one day and no errors the next day. You'll kind of have consistent errors throughout. So if in general you're seeing, spikes in your heart rate up to like moderate intensity, um, every other day over the course of several weeks, that trend is usually pretty reliable. And again, it can be a great way to not overthink how hard you're working, but be able to look at it sort of retrospectively.
Well, thank you. I like that steps. Sometimes miles, I do wonder, like if you have something that estimates miles, like you have a watch or something. How does it estimate miles if one person is 6 feet tall and the other person is 5 feet tall? I mean, is it an estimate or is it really accurate?
Sometimes, depending on the device, they'll ask for your height. And so
Uh-huh.
they'll approximate your step length into a distance. But again, some
Okay.
people have longer and shorter legs versus torsos.
Yeah.
Some devices have GPS tracking on them. And so there'll be like a mapping function, and that might be a little more precise. But again, like where you guys are, if you were to walk up into the hills, a mile uphill is not the same as a mile flat in the city. So again, distance alone is not always capturing the whole big
Yeah.
picture. And that's why sometimes it's helpful to take all of these metrics that you track, but still kind of apply your own, good judgment of being able to say, like, that was a really tough walk. It was on a trail. It was kind of like rocky, and that made it a lot more challenging. So you give yourself credit
Right.
for those types of things.
Exactly. Erwin asks, what do you do or what do you recommend for arthritic hips? I'd like to walk more, but I start getting pain within about 15 minutes of walking.
Yeah. So I think for folks who have pain that kind of comes on sort of after a period of time of exercise, so you're basically kind of lacking like the endurance. It's not that you couldn't start, it's that you couldn't keep going. A lot of times, those folks, I really like to assess kind of their strength to see if there are any obvious deficits there. So this is something that a physical therapist could do for you, certainly in a clinical setting. But it's also something where you might take some time to just reflect on whether you are doing anything that challenges that muscular system that supports that back and lumbar pelvic hip kind of complex. Imagine like if you drew a rectangle between your belly button and like the tops of your thighs, and that's all like a really complex kind of combination of joints that work together really closely. So, I think that's typically when kind of nothing else is going on, a scenario where I would kind of look to your strength program to see if there's any low-hanging fruit there to work on. In general, with arthritic joints, we see a pattern of a spike in pain after inactivity. So usually like after sitting for a long time or first thing in the morning, because we know there's like sediment that settles in the joint. And with turnover, with little movement, that starts to improve. So it's different. I'm just calling this out because you mentioned that that you suffer from arthritis in the hip. It would be different if you noticed that it was a little creaky to start and then it kind of improved over time. That would be, to me, more characteristic of expected joint behavior. If again, the osteoarthritis was the root cause of that pain.
So it hurts. So I didn't quite get that. So it hurts after you've exercised for a while if it's arthritis or in the beginning, but it works itself out.
The latter. So if it hurts kind of in the
Okay.
beginning, or usually it may not always be pain, it might just be a sensation of tightness or
Yeah.
stiffness. And then
Yeah.
it kind of works itself out with a little bit of light motion. That's really characteristic of expected behavior of an arthritic joint.
Okay.
If you're experiencing that pain onset after 15 minutes, I would usually expect there to be maybe some kind of strength deficit there that could be
Okay.
worked on with a strength and conditioning program.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Great question. Either Roman or Ramon asks, how do you motivate yourself and how do you build a habit?
Yeah. So, how do you motivate yourself comes back to this question of sometimes you just can't. And so that's why all you need is enough motivation to say, I want to make a change. And then you don't need to live or die off the motivation because it's not going to be around indefinitely, anyways. But I think starting the environment to support a habit. So if you think about all of the things that go into doing something new in your routine, it's almost like planning a trip. There's all these logistics involved. You gotta pick a destination and a hotel and pack some stuff. So there's all these other things that aren't really related to like going on the trip, but you have to plan them ahead of time. I would think of this, in the same way. When you're planning a new routine, when you're trying to build a new habit, what are all the things that are going to get in the way of you executing that habit. Maybe it's, well, where do I go? Well, you got to find a place to exercise. It could be just another room of your house. It could be the park. It could be the gym, whatever it is. And then develop that relationship with that place. If obviously if it's a gym, you can get a membership. That's pretty clear. If it's a part of your house, designate that as the exercise part of the house. You could put down a yoga mat, you could put down some weights and just leave them there. And that could be your designated exercise area. Um, the other things that come up often are like, how do I have time to do this or decide when to do it? And for everyone, it kind of depends how you organize the rest of your life. But for folks who are really dependent on a calendar or a series of reminders to, I don't know, take any medication or call a friend or meet up with a family member, incorporating it into your list of daily activities, just like it was as important as taking medication or going to an appointment. So in that way, it's kind of like planning anything else in your life, but first trying to tackle all the little things that aren't necessarily doing the exercise, but making it easier to do the exercise because you're removing barriers to it.
Yeah, I think if from a psychological perspective, and which you really addressed, is also what are you telling yourself about starting an exercise program? Like, what are your conversations in your head? Is it this is going to be hard? I'm not going to be able to do it. It's going to suck up too much of my time. I'm going to hurt myself, or is it something more positive? Or are you making too big a deal about it? Meaning, like exercise doesn't have to be complicated, right? Like Dr. Hsing was saying, you can get up, you can go after tea, you can step out your door and go for a walk. That it doesn't have to be something really complicated. You have to drop a lot of money into it. It's really something that is pretty accessible for most people. Um, so anyway, just thinking from a psychological perspective, check on what you're saying to yourself in your head. Um, Judy, this is a great question. How do you know what to do at the gym?
Mm.
Hmm.
That's a great one, and one I find people often get stuck with. So if you're going into the gym for the first time, I mean, there's like banging noises, people are grunting. Is there an order to like access the machine? Like there's no sign up sheet. What's going on? It can be really intimidating. So I think one of the best places to get started, if this suits you, can be in a group fitness setting because it allows you to access someone who has thought a little bit about what you're going to do in that day, and is going to be able to answer questions and walk you through it. Now, that's a really specific kind of experience, and there's a lot of different kinds of group fitness classes, but I know that's not for everyone. So I think that another thing that can be really helpful is to bring a friend and make a plan with a friend of what you're going to work on. One of the things that that allows is for two people to approach a machine and sort of talk about what are we going to do here? Do we like this machine? Does this make sense to us? Versus moving on to something else. It feels so much more friendly to have someone with you. Um, it's kind of like anything else in life that's like a little easier to do when you've got a partner with you. But certainly, depending on the setting you're in, there should be someone at the front desk who is there to help you out. So that's another resource that, again, sometimes is easier to access if you've got someone with you. But those people are always there at the community center, at the gym to talk you through how to use like the equipment or even make recommendations of what might be more appropriate if you're just starting out. I do have a good friend who works at a gym and often tells me that it's one of the most underused resources at the gym because folks don't realize that that's available for them. They just think, well, I was supposed to waltz in here and just know what everything is.
Yeah.
And that's not the case. Everyone had their first experience, their first time.
What about when people go to the gym? Like, let's say they're going to go to the gym 2 times a week or 3 times a week. Do you recommend like they work on a body part, one body part, or two body parts every time they go? Like, what would that approach, be? Because I know some people will focus on certain muscle groups, and other people will do like, everything on kind of like a circuit. how do you get started? What would you say to Judy if she had to walk into the gym and say, okay, this is my first time, this is what I'm gonna do?
Yeah, if I'm working one-on-one with someone, it's usually something that demands a bigger conversation about sort of what your goals are and what some of the other like long-term, short-term things you might be trying to achieve are. But for like the general public, I think it's really great to consider that you're trying to build like a full body program. In other words, you're not just trying to work on a specific movement. And I really like to think of it as like um, as simple as splitting it into four quadrants. So there's the top half of your body, there's the bottom half of your body. That's two. And it's not a definitive line, of course, there's a lot of overlap. And then there's kind of the front of your body and the back of your body. So if you think about your upper body, there's kind of like the pushing types of movements that are in the front. Imagine like pushing a heavy door open. And the pulling type of movements, which is like if you had to like pull yourself up from like a bench with like a high bar, or if you had to pull yourself up out of a chair. So that's kind of like front back of the top half, and that's two quadrants. And now if you think about the lower half of your body, again, there's kind of like the front and the back. There's like your thighs and what you can see if you just look down into your lap. And then there's the back. So that's like your glutes that you're sitting on, potentially if you're sitting to watch this, or your hamstrings, the back of your legs, the back of your lower legs. And so that's a really simple way to just kind of break down, okay, what feels tired with any given exercise. If you don't have the background to know like what's the name of this muscle that's being worked, I think it's really good to just reflect on like, well, what felt tired when I did that? And say like mostly it was like the front of my thighs that felt really tired when I was doing this sort of squatting movement. So then the very next exercise, I would move on to something that doesn't challenge that exact same area, and sort of move to like what's something that makes the back of my thighs feel a little bit challenged, and kind of pair those things in that way. There's a lot more that can go into long-term exercise programming, but it really requires, I think, a more in-depth conversation with the individual about what they're hoping to achieve and what they can sort of commit to. But that's one way to kind of just start to segment out your body into the different parts of it.
Great. Thank you. That's really great advice because it is kind of like a smorgasbord of machines and free weights when you walk into a gym. Hard to
Yeah.
know what to do. Here's a question from Carrie. How do I break through exercising with chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia? When I start to exercise, my pain increases, not motivating.
Yeah, I could imagine that it's not you're not getting that reward part, right? Of that habit formation cycle. In fact, you may even be getting like or feeling like you're being punished for doing the routine because you're feeling like your condition is being exacerbated. So what's really tough with managing any kind of chronic condition that makes your response to exercise not what you expect, is that there's not one definitive answer to like, you should do A instead of B, or you should exercise for this period of time. It very can be very, really can be very individualized. And what I think folks tend to find more success with is a pretty careful logging of what they're doing, such that even if you do a bout of exercise and you have kind of a poor response to it, um, that's not a great outcome, obviously, but at least if we are logging, like that was 15 minutes of walking in this part of the neighborhood that's a bit hilly, then that 15 minutes of hilly walking, that created, whatever response you're experiencing, and you have that in your log. So that's a good way for you to know, okay, what I could try is 10 minutes of walking in that same hilly neighborhood, or I could try 15 minutes of walking in the flat neighborhood. Those would be two reasonable options for your next attempt. And again, you would gather more information from that experience to help you understand more about how your body is responding. It's not as simple as that because I know there's a lot of other things in your life that are going to be variables that impact how you respond to exercise. But all that being said, I think over time you start to build this more robust understanding of how your body responds, and it makes you like such a powerful expert on what your body does and needs, that over time you can really learn like what's the right amount of stimulus to get something good.
Yeah, I think how to read your body is like you're talking about is something that uh it can be difficult to figure out, especially as your body changes. And my question is like recovery. You talk about that recovery period and you talk about people who overload their bodies and then they get injured. How do you know when you're not recovering enough? Because let's say somebody, whether you just starting an exercise program or you've been exercising for many years and your body changes,
Yeah.
how do you know that you're not recovering enough short of being in pain? What do you look for to know you need recovery?
Yeah. So I think this sounds so simple, but checking in with how you're feeling at the same time every day, it could be right when you wake up, is a really good way to kind of get a sense of how you're responding. So when you take something like a bout of exercise, like a single session of a walk or a class or anything like that, I really consider the whole, next 24 hours as fair game for like a reflection of how your body is responding to that. So it could be that you take a walk on Monday morning and on Tuesday morning you wake up really tired. And I think that would be a good data point to say, like, well, maybe I just ate what I normally ate and drank what I normally drank, but maybe I needed to, drink a little extra water or maybe have a little extra protein that day, something like that. Or maybe I needed 30 minutes more of sleep. But if you're set in your routines, sometimes it can be hard to adapt there.
Mhm.
Um, Another thing that can be helpful, certainly for people who are using wearables, is to lean on some of the data from those wearables. That can include like resting heart rate. We can see things like resting heart rate rise if we're not recovering well. Things like HRV, heart rate variability. It's another metric that a lot of these wearable devices also report. And maybe if you peek at your dashboard, you kind of ignore it because you don't know what that number means. But that can also be a good approximation of how your body is responding, how your sleep quality is going. If you're sleeping really deeply after exercise and you're like, man, why am I sleeping so late? Sometimes, let yourself sleep an extra 30, 60 minutes if you're starting to exercise because your body may need that. So being really kind of like introspective with how your body is feeling and using those markers like instead of just saying, well, this is how many glasses of water I drink a day, doing things like, visualizing urine color to really check, am I really hydrated? And things like that to check your response.
That's really important because what you're saying is, if I'm understanding this correctly, is it's not just recover means you take the day off. It means that you might need to do other things that will aid your recovery.
Yeah. Meaning the exercise itself is the first part, and everything else you do after that can contribute or potentially detract from how your body really like consolidates that exercise.
Okay, so that's important. Yeah, because even like for me, I'm like, do I, there are days when you really crave protein.
Yeah.
And so it's like you should listen to that
Eat
if
it.
you're having kind of a thought.
Yeah.
So, Claire, can you tell us a little bit about Bold? Because I see that you have Bold, and I know a little bit about Bold too. Can you tell us a little bit what Bold is, since we have our audience doesn't may not know that they may be eligible for
Yeah.
to take advantage of Bold.
Absolutely. Bold is an online platform that allows you to access fitness classes and education around fitness and general health and wellness. It's built specifically for seniors. And what I think is really amazing about that is that we put a lot of thought and intention around tailoring things directly for our audience. I think our classes are really, a class apart from general fitness classes that you might find for like a broader age population. And I think what can be really nice about the ability to access a lot of this type of content on this kind of platform is that there is this element of curation. We've spent a lot of time and effort to make sure that all the things we deliver are going to be appropriate for the folks who get them. And that can be really valuable in building confidence that like this is a helpful thing for you to be working on.
And age bold is part of the Medicare Advantage program at UCLA. So I just wanted to share that with everybody. So if you have that program, you would have I don't know quite how it works, but you could sign up for age bold through Medicare Advantage. So check
Yep.
it out. Um, so Dr. Hsing, I can't thank you enough for being here today. This was an awesome uh, webinar, if I should say so myself, because it was so practical and it answers so many questions that people have about not just starting, but maintaining an exercise program. And a big message that I got from you today, too, was don't be afraid if you're older, right? Don't be afraid. Don't be shy about exercising. And we know it's so important for cardiovascular health, for brain health to exercise. Like, don't leave it out. It's right up there with having a proper diet and getting enough sleep. And so, thank you for talking about how to actually get going with it and keep it going and to do it safely and effectively.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed my time here and I hope it was helpful for some of you.
And I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. We really appreciate you joining in. And just to let you know, you will get the link to this webinar once it is on YouTube. So, and if anybody, registered, they'll be able, whoever registers will be able to get the link for it. So thank you all for joining us today. And thank you to our team, Dee Dee and Olivia and Ernie in AV. And we'll see you for our next webinar. So take care, everyone. Be well.